So I want to talk about some of the modifications that I think are a good idea on a KLR and that I've done to my current KLR. And I'll talk about a few of the things I've done to my old KLRs too. So we're just outside of Lake Hemet, California in the San Jacinto Mountains. So let's get started. So you can see this bike is pretty heavily modified, and I've done a lot of things that make it better for me and for the kind of riding I like to do. So why don't we start out with some of the basic things. So everyone's going to think about tires, right? So I personally run these Tusk D-Sport tires here, which I have featured in another review. But you can run any good 50/50 tire, and it depends on how you're using the bike. I've had a lot of miles on KLRs with Dunlop 606, and those have proven to be a good tire for this bike. Kenda K270 was an option in the past, but there's a lot of better options coming out nowadays. So just run a tire that suits your riding style, but if you're going to go off-road, knobbies are a huge benefit. Bike protection is important on any dual sport bike. So I have the Tusk engine bars, but you can run any brand of crash bar that you like. The KLR, these plastics are pretty fragile, so that's something to keep in mind. You could break those. Also, your radiators on the other side there. Hand guards, whatever kind of good metal wraparound hand guard that you like is a good idea. Stronger handlebars, whether you do a Tusk or a Renthal or whatever brand you prefer, just go to a stronger handlebar. I like to have side racks, not only for putting luggage on, but also they just give more armor back here. They also give you a great place to grab on to the bike if you need to drag it or pick it up or lift it. A skid plate I think is very important on a KLR. It doesn't have a ton of ground clearance, as you can see here, and if you use it as a dual sport bike, you're going to hit that engine, that frame pretty hard down there, so definitely get a good skid plate. Beyond that, for bike protection, I think that's kind of the main things. If you get into things like, brake rotor guards and things like that, I think that gets a bit overkill for a KLR, although they do make a guard that goes over here and a guard that goes over the rear master cylinder. I would get those. I just have forgotten to put those on this bike. So let's talk about performance for a minute. So I mean, talking about performance on a KLR is kind of like talking, putting lipstick on a pig kind of an idea, but we should talk about it anyway. So there's a few things that I like to do to a KLR to wake it up a little bit. And this is more of a butt dyno thing than proven results, but I do feel that an exhaust, I'm using the Lex exhaust, but there's a lot of options. I do feel that feels like the bike has more torque, but that could just be psychological based on the noise. A few other things for performance. So on terms of the engine, so I do the cam timing advance. It's called the MC mod. You can look it up. Basically, you advance, I think it's the exhaust timing, one tooth, and the bike seems to rev freer. And other than that, it's just about keeping the spark plugs, not the spark plugs, keeping the valves adjusted and doing your normal maintenance, those kinds of things. Okay, so suspension. Aftermarket suspension will really transform a KLR. So I've used everything from the Recourse suspension, which this bike has, the Intimidators and different springs in the front. And then in the back, I've got the Recourse shock. I think that the Cogent Dynamics Moab shock was my favorite shock for the KLR. It seemed to work a lot better than this Recourse. And then for front suspension, my personal preference is the Racetech cartridge emulators and a lightweight oil, I think it's 5 or 7 weight, and straight rate springs for your weight. So I found that was the best setup for the KLR. Really smooths out the washboards and make the bike handle pretty well off-road. The Recourse setup is okay, but it feels pretty harsh to me and just doesn't feel very refined, but other people have different experiences. But suspension is a big deal. So in 2014 and a half, they brought out what they call the new edition for the second gen KLR, and they put in stiffer springs, which was a big upgrade, because the bike for when it came out in 87 all the way to 2014 had extremely way too soft of a spring for any rider over like 150 pounds, which is everyone who lives in America or anywhere really. So something really to keep in mind. You need to upgrade your suspension if you're going to use this bike in a serious way. lighting. So I have the stock bulbs in the headlight, but then I put on these aftermarket lights. I bought these lights on Amazon. They're called Sam lights. They were like $60 or $70. They're a much better quality than those really cheap ones you see, and they're super bright. I think they're like 3,000 lumens, but you can get these, or you can get like a Baja Designs or a Denali if you want to go high end, but you know, that's kind of what you put on a GS, so I don't know about that. But yeah, put some lights on it. I have these wired into the high beam so that when I flip my high beam on, I get all my light output. So that's what I like. I don't like to have to, every time there's an oncoming car, look for another switch. I don't want to do that, so it's wired into the high beam. Wind protection. So for wind protection, on this KLR, I've got the zero gravity shield, which I've actually cut down. This was the taller shield that I cut down myself, made it in a little bit different shape. The Gen 2 wind protection with this fairing is pretty good. It actually provides surprisingly good wind protection for a adventure dual sport bike, which is one of the big traits, selling points of the KLR, if it does have selling points at all. So wind protection is pretty good. The stock windshield on the Gen 2 is not bad. On the Gen 1 bike, wind protection is pretty challenging. It's hard to really get very good wind protection on that, although it's better than some dual sports out there. But I'll put up some photos here of what you can do on a Gen 1. I've played with that when I used to own a Gen 1 bike. They make taller windshields for that too. Okay, so let's kind of just make a category called everything else and try to jam this in here. So comfort and ergonomics. So I like seat concepts, but I've also used Corbin seats and Sargent seats. I think on a KLR, the seat concepts low seat is a really good option. It kind of gives you a little better reach to the ground. I also like their commuter seat. And for me, I'm 180 pounds. I find their soft foam to be better, but that's just me. So that's a good. In 2014, they put on a more comfortable seat on the new edition, the later of the second gen bikes, and that was a pretty good seat. But up until 2014, the seats were kind of crap. I mean, they were truly crap. So something to think about. I use gel grips. I use these double take adventure mirrors, huge improvement. I have the KLR Rally Dash on mine, which I like because you can put a GPS up here and it also raises up your windshield. I've got a USB outlet. I've got heated grips. I probably don't even remember everything I have, but there's a lot of stuff that you can do. In terms of luggage, I mean, I've talked about this in other videos, but I really like soft luggage setup. This bike, actually, when I bought it, had hard panniers, and I really don't like those, so I took those off. For day rides like this, I just strap on a little tail pack, just for riding out here for the day. So let's see. So I think that's about it for modifications in terms of what I wanted to talk about. For now, one last thing on this bike I did is it has the larger brake rotor up front. Just gives you a little bit more stopping power. So anyway, I hope this was useful.